Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Samach Vav, Yevamos 66. And we are going to look at the Mishnah on 66a. And the Mishnah says the following. We say in this week's parasha that a Kohen is not allowed to marry a Chalala, a woman who's disqualified. One way you become disqualified is if the woman enters into a marriage that she's not allowed to. So if an almana, a widow, the Mishnah on 66a, almana a Kohen Gadol, if a widow marries a Kohen Gadol, this week's parasha, he's not allowed to. So the marriage, he has to divorce her, but until he does, the marriage is binding, and she is called disqualified. So she's not able to eat the truma. Normally, a wife, a woman who marries a Kohen, can eat the truma because she's part of his household. But in this case, the widow marries the Kohen Gadol, or a grusha or chalutza or Kohen Hajot. A regular Kohen cannot marry a divorcee. So she also loses the right to eat the truma. But let's say she brings in assets into the estate. Now this is going to sound repugnant, repulsive, but this was the way the Talmud spoke. Sometimes it's completely foreign to us, but they had slaves. So let's say she brought in avdei mulug, the avdei tzon barzel, slaves that she designated as mulug property and slaves that she designated as tzon barzel property. Okay, so what is mulug property and what is tzon barzel property? It's as follows, that when a woman enters into a marriage, she has the right to designate her assets however she wants. So she could designate it as mulug, plucking property, which means that the husband has the right to the fruits of the principal, but she retains the principal. So at the termination of the marriage, she gets the principal back and the husband keeps the fruits of while they were married. And alternatively, there's avdei tzon barzel. Avdei tzon barzel is sheep and iron property. That is where the husband and the wife agree that at the outset of the marriage, this asset is worth, let's say, a specific amount. Let's say it's a diamond ring. They say the diamond ring is worth $10,000, and at the conclusion of the marriage, the husband has to pay the woman $10,000 for that diamond ring. Now, let's say the ring went up in value or went down in value. It doesn't matter since he established the value of it at the outset of the marriage. That's the established price of, let's say, $10,000. So let's say she designates these slaves that she brings into the marriage on 66a as either mulug slaves or sheep and iron slaves. Avdei mulug lo yochel b'truma. The sheep, the plucking slaves, the avdei mulug, since she really retains the principal, they cannot eat from the truma because the husband only has the right to their labor. He doesn't really own them, and so therefore they're not under his household. So avdei mulug cannot eat the truma, but the avdei tzon barzel, but the sheep and iron slaves, the husband owns the principal there, so they can eat the truma. And now, as the Mishnah so often does, that after it gives the case example of it, then defines it. So the Mishnah says, yes.
Could you answer a question?
Sure, of course.
The mulug slaves you defined as kind of like a financial, the principal is with the wife, but is retained with the wife, and the interest goes with the husband. And the second thing, the tzon barzels seem to be like commodities or things like that. Is that a valid distinction, or is that just
no? It could be the same item. It could be the exact same item. It's just how do they want to designate it? It could be the same thing. It could be the same table, the same apartment building. It's just how are they designating it?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Is that clear?
Yes. Thank you.
I can explain again if it's not clear. So just basically the wife has the right. Oh, I'm just going to mute it. The wife has the right to designate the property, and so let's say she takes a building. She could designate it as mulug property, in which case the husband gets all the rent while they're married, and then she just takes, if the building appreciates, she'll get the full value, or if it depreciates, she has the full depreciation. Or she could designate it as tzonu barzel property, in which case the husband the husband has guaranteed that he's going to pay a certain amount. So the husband is going to have all the risk associated with the property. Anyway, we go back to the Mishnah. Mishnah, the Mishnah is going to answer exactly what Mordechai was asking about. This is what's considered Avdei Maluk. In Mesu, let's say these slaves die. Mesu loss, she has the loss because she retained the principal. Mosira, if the slaves go up in value, Osira law, she gets the gain in the value. And even though the husband has to support them, it's her value added. So these Avdei Maluk, since she really retains the principal, they cannot eat from the truma because she is disqualified from eating from the truma because she's not a Kohen. She was disqualified to marry a Kohen. These are the slaves of the Tzom Barzel. And Mesu lo. Well, since he has to pay her the money regardless, if those slaves die, it's his loss. If the slaves go up in value, it's his gain. He's the guarantor, but he also gets the benefit if they go up. So he's the owner. So really, under those circumstances, they get to eat from the truma because they're owned by the Kohen. But Bas Yisrael Shenises with Kohen. Let's say we have the daughter of an Israelite who marries a Kohen. So a regular Jewish woman who marries a Kohen, and she brings slaves into the marriage. So in this case, she brings in slaves. It doesn't matter because she is allowed to marry this Kohen, and when she's married to the Kohen, she can eat the truma. So therefore, her slaves can eat from the truma. However, if it was a Bas Kohen, Shenises Yisrael, let's say it was a Kohen's daughter, a Kohenes, who married a Jewish woman, and she brings in, who married a Jewish man, and she brings into the marriage, she brings in slaves. So now she's married the Israelite man. So she can't eat the truma, and so too her slaves cannot eat from the truma. So the Talmud goes back to the first case where the widow marries the Kohen Gadol, and we said that her slaves, who are Maluk slaves, cannot eat from the truma. But Avdei Maluk, the Talmud asks, why can the Maluk slaves of this widow not eat from the truma? Amai. Why can't they eat from the truma? Gemara introduces us to a very important concept. They should be able to eat from the truma. Why not? Why don't we say lahave kikinyano shekana kinyan? Since he's basically, and this is also obviously not a woke expression. It's not very ecumenical or egalitarian, or really, it sounds a little misogynistic. But we just have to talk about it's a legal text. So according to the Talmud's understanding, the woman was basically betrothed to the man through an acquisition. So therefore, the Torah says in our portion, anyone who is kinyan kaspo, who the Kohen, so to speak, validates a relationship through money, and that's one of the ways in which a marriage is betrothed through money, is considered to be his acquisition. And so therefore, the Avdei Maluk cannot eat from the truma. Why not? Why can't they? Are something that the Kohen has, so to speak, acquired, because he has married the woman, and so her acquisitions become his acquisitions. The Tanya Minayim with Kohen, as we learned in the Brisa. So how do we know that a Kohen should nasa isha? The Kohen marries a woman, the Kana Avadim, and after he marries this woman, he has acquired, or if he acquires slaves, if he marries a woman or if he acquires slaves, that the woman or the slaves who have become into the Kohen's household can eat from his truma. That states the Kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspo hu yochal bo. That's this week's parsha, the beginning of Parshat Emor. If the Kohen acquires a soul, then he can hu yochal bo. He could give him the truma. Isha, and says the Brisa, how do we know? And let's say a woman shekanta avadim, that the woman acquired slaves, avadav shekanu avadim, or if a slave acquired slaves, sheyochu b'truma. How do we know that they can eat from the truma as well? That the slaves of the woman, or the slaves of the slaves, can who themselves were part of the Kohen's household. How do we know that their slaves, their derivatives, so to speak, can eat from the truma? Because it states the Kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspo, and the words in that verse kinyan kaspo are redundant because it already says ki yikne Kohen ki yikne nefesh. So the words say he acquires his with money. It's extra. So what does it mean? Hu yochal bo and kinyan shekana kinyan ochel. So meaning to say he can eat from it, and also anything that he acquired can eat from the truma. So if that's the case, this Kohen who's married this woman, her slaves have been, which were acquired by her, they should be able to eat the truma because she is in part of the Kohen's household. So the Gemara introduces us, the Gemara tells us no. The reason why her slaves cannot eat from the truma in this circumstance is whoever themselves can eat the truma can cause others to eat the truma via their relationship with them. But since this woman, she herself is disqualified from eating the truma because she's in a non-kosher marriage, because she married a Kohen when she was a widow, Kohen Gadol when she was a widow. Therefore, she is not allowed to cause her slaves to eat the truma as a result of her, because she herself can't eat the truma. Talmud says that's not accurate. Below, is that really the case? We have a person. Let's say there's a Kohen who himself is uncircumcised, let's say for really good reasons, according to some commentaries. Let's say his brothers are hemophiliac, so it's too dangerous for him to become circumcised. So that's what Rashi understands it. So under those circumstances, he wouldn't be able to eat the truma. Nevertheless, or also a Kohen who's tamei, and he can't eat the truma. It's this week's parsha. But nevertheless, but their children, so to speak, can eat from the truma, even though they themselves cannot eat it. So we have a case of someone who can't eat it, but they allow others to eat it. Says, no, that case is different. There, it's just like they have a canker sore. Their mouth is hurting. Remove the sore from their mouth and they could eat. Circumcise the guy, or get rid of the ritual impurity by going into the mikvah, and you could eat the truma. And Gemara says, mamzer. What about a mamzer? I'm talking about a situation, it doesn't need to be a mamzer, but that was just the actual case, Rashi says. But let's say there's a woman who's married to a Kohen. As long as she's married to him, she can eat from the truma. When he dies, she's only allowed to eat the truma if she has a descendant from him. So let's say this woman marries a Kohen. She has a daughter. Her daughter marries a non-Kohen, and they have an offspring. Then the mother's daughter dies, so they have this grandson or granddaughter who's not a Kohen, and they can eat from the truma. This grandson can't eat from the truma because they're not a Kohen. But because she has this grandson, she can eat from the truma. So we see from here this circumstance of a mamzer. Let's say if the daughter married a mamzer, that he can't eat from the truma, and yet he's able to eat from the truma. So the Gemara. So we see from here, even though you can't feed others, you can eat it. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravina explains the following. So we see that even though you can't eat it, you could cause others to eat it. So if that's the case, why can this woman not allow her slaves to eat from the truma? There's nichsei mulug slaves, the avdei mulug. So Ravina explains, kinyan ochel ka'amar. Kinyan ochel machil she'eno ochel eno machil. But when do we say that if you can eat, you cause others to eat? If you yourself were acquired, so to speak. So this grandson, in this case, he was born into the family, so he can allow others to eat. But if it was a relationship that came out of an acquisition, then only if you yourself can eat, like in the case of a marriage of a woman, if she marries a Kohen, only if she herself can eat, can her assets also eat as well. That's the first explanation as to why these avdei mulug, these slaves who are designated as mulug property, cannot eat from the truma. Rava gives a different answer. Rava says, biblically speaking, these slaves can eat from the truma. The rabbis made the decree. Why did the rabbis say that they can't eat? Because we basically want to force a divorce. This is a non-kosher marriage, and we don't want this widow to continue in this marriage. So we want to say, we want her to say, listen, I can't eat from the truma. My slaves can't eat from the truma. What am I getting at in this marriage? Am I basically a mistress? Am I really not a real wife? She's going to try to move to get the marriage terminated. So that's why we want to try to penalize her, and that's why we don't allow her slaves to eat from the truma. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi says it's another rabbinic decree. We're concerned that she might come to feed them the truma after her husband dies. They can eat the truma, biblically speaking, says Rav Ashi, while her husband is alive, because she is to the husband and her slaves are to her, and so therefore they can eat from the truma. Once her husband dies, her slaves can't eat from the truma anymore because she can't eat. So that's why we're concerned that she'll feed them after the husband dies. The Gemara says, wait, that's not enough of an answer. Well, if that's the case, any regular Jewish woman who marries a Kohen, her slave should not be able to eat from the truma because maybe she'll feed them after her husband dies. Ravashi says, no, but Amana Kohenes, no, specifically by a widow to a Kohen, we don't let her eat. We don't let her slaves eat from the truma. The asi or ruye, she's going to come and give a ruling for herself that she can eat, that her slaves can eat from the truma. Because she'll say, "Mei kara, when I was in my father's home, and my father was a kohen, then achli b'truma." So we're talking about a widow who herself was a kohen. She'll say, "When I was in my father's home, and I was allowed to eat the truma, and so my slaves can eat from the truma." Mei kara achli b'truma devei nasha. Now. Into Vilay, I married this Kohen. Into Vilay, Truma de Gavrai. Now I'm eating the Truma because I'm in his home. But she doesn't realize. Then her husband dies. And she'll say, "Oh, I go back to my father's home. I can still feed the slaves the Truma." She won't realize the Meikaro. She won't realize that at first she wasn't a disqualified woman. She didn't participate in this non-kosher marriage. So that's why she could feed her slaves truma. But now, so now she's made herself disqualified by coming into this marriage. She can no longer eat from the truma. Gemara says, "Tenach almana kohenes almana bas Yisrael ma'ikol meimer." So Gemara says, "Okay, I understand why a widow is the daughter of a kohen. I understand why we want to say that her slaves can't eat from the truma because." She might try to feed them like she did originally, but let's say she was just married to a regular Jew. She was the daughter of a regular Jew. Her slaves never ate from the truma until she married the Kohen. So what's the reason why they can't eat from the truma? The Gemara says no. We're not going to draw a distinction amongst widows. We just say all widows when they marry they can't eat from the truma. So the Gemara says. So the Gemara says we had established that if they designate the property as Tzom Barzel property, that when the marriage terminates, the wife gets back the value. Like let's say we did let's say we had an apartment building. We established apartment buildings $1 million. Then at the termination of the marriage, whether or not the building went up to worth $100 million or when it went down to worth $1, the husband has to give her back $1 million. But let's say the following scenario. Let's say she brings in this asset which is evaluated into the marriage. He'll marry us, and now that they're getting divorced. She says, she says, "I want my building back." And he says, "Yeah, I know I owe you $1 million for the building. I'm going to give you the money. I'm not giving you the building. I like the building. I believe in the future of this building." Didn't me. Who's right? Does she get the building, or does he say, "I only want to give you the money"? Rabbi Yehuda says on the top of 66b, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hadin in Ima. She's right. She gets to keep she says, "I want the building back." So basically what we're in effect saying is he doesn't really own the property. Even though he maybe owns the property, he doesn't really own the property. He has the right to the principal, but he doesn't really own the property. He's guarantor, but he doesn't really own it. That's why if she demands the actual asset back, he has to give it to her. Whereas Rabbi Ami Amar Hadinimo, Rabbi Ami said, no, the husband can give her the value, meaning he really does own it. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Hadinimo, Rabbi Yehuda says that she can get the asset back. Mishum Shevach Beisavia. She could say, look, it's my family heirloom. I want this building back. It says it's the family property. It's our jewels. We want it back. So therefore, Didehadi, Rav Ami Amar Adini Mo. He says, no, he gets to give her the money. And what's Rav Ami's proof? He says, let me bring a proof from our Mishnah. Because what does it say in our Mishnah? We learned in our Mishnah, in Mesulo, that if these slaves die, it's his loss. If it goes up, it's his value. We see from here, since he's their guarantor. Yochu, that's why they can eat from the Truma. So we see it's his. So therefore, he can just give her the money. Amrav Safra Mikatani Vehin Shilo. It doesn't say they're his in our Mishnah. It says Hol v'chayv b'achoriyusam. He's their guarantor. Katani. That's all it states. They're really not his. So Gemara says, you mean to say wherever he's the guarantor, they could eat from the truma? Is that really the case? But didn't we learn Yisrael shesachar para mikohen? Let's say there was a Jew who says, I'm renting a regular Israelite who says, I'm renting a cow from a Kohen. So since the Kohen really owns the cow, even though the Jew's renting it, the Kohen, the Israel could give the animal truma food to eat. Because it's a Kohen's cow. So therefore the Kohen can eat the truma food. Kohen shesachar para Israel, but if the Kohen rents the cow from the Israelites, even though the Kohen is responsible to feed the animal, he can't feed it truma. So we see from here, even though you're responsible, you can't feed it to truma. So therefore, doesn't this contradict what our Mishnah is saying? If you're a guarantor, you can feed it to truma. So doesn't this mean that guarantor really means ownership? The Gemara says no. But Tizbar, you think that they're really the same? The Kohen in this case can't feed it truma because he doesn't really own it. Sure, if the animal gets lost or stolen, he's responsible. But if you rent it and it goes down in value, is that your loss? Or if lightning strikes it, is that your loss? No. Or if it goes on a hunger strike, is that your loss? No. The case of our Mishnah is similar to the end of, is more similar to the end of that Mishnah which we're citing about the renting of the Kohen, of the cow from the Kohen. Because what do we say there? Yisrael shesham para b'kohen. A Jew says, I'm going to rent your cow. Excuse me, and when he rents the cow, he says, this cow's worth $1,000. So because there he took upon himself that he's going to return a cow that's $1,000, he can't feed it the truma to the cow because he's the guarantor of it. But the Kohen did a similar situation from the Jew, and the Kohen says, I'm going to return to you a cow that's worth $1,000. We see that he can feed it to truma. So we see if you're the guarantor, you can feed it to truma. So Yosef, Rabbi, Rav Yosef, B'Sheli, Pirkei, Rav Nachman. So Rabbi and Rav Yosef were sitting down at the end of the drasha that Rav Nachman gave. Can you imagine? Rabbi and Rav Yosef went to your drasha. Can you imagine such a? So Rav Nachman was the Avbez, and they had to go. So the Yosef Kami, and they said, Tanya Kavasa de Rav Yehuda, Tanya Kavasa de Rav Ami. I said, we have a brisa that supports Rav Yehuda who says that the woman can demand the actual asset back, the principal back, and we have a brisa like Rav Ami. He says, no, the husband can just give her the money. Because what's the brisa? Tanya Kavasa de Rav Ami. Hold on. You have a brisa like Rav Ami. And Rav Ami says he could just give her the money back. Because what do we say? That sheep, that's Tzom Barzel property. So they're the principal. So there's a principle, there's an established law that says in the Torah that if you are the owner of a Canaanite slave and you knock out its tooth and eye, it goes free. So it says in this brisa that if the husband knocks out the tooth or eye of these slaves that are Tzom Barzel, they go free. That means he's the owner. But if the woman knocks it out, it doesn't go free. That supports Rav Ami's claim that the husband's really the owner and he could just give her the money and he could keep the asset. Tanya Kavasi de Rav Yehuda, we have a brisa that supports Rav Yehuda. If you bring in, let's say, something to the estate, let's say you brought in an apartment building, if the husband wants to sell it, well, Yimkor, he can't sell it. That's like Rav Yehuda, you need her permission. Well, not only that, even if the husband say, listen, here's this building, which I'm bringing into the estate, I'm going to give you $1 million for the building at the end of the marriage. So he brought his own. If he wants to sell it, well, Yimkor, he can't sell it. It's hers. So let's say they had hard times and they both agreed we have to sell it. This came before Rashbag, and he said, if after she dies, the husband wants to move to invalidate the sale and saying, I didn't really have a right to sell it, he's able to. This proves it's hers, and he doesn't really own it. The law is like Rav Yehuda, and that meaning the woman really owns it. But then we have a brisa like Rav Ami. No, even though we have a brisa like Rav Ami, Mistabra time at Rav Yehuda. It's more logical to assume the law is like Rav Yehuda, Mishum Shavach Beisavia, because it's really her family's heirloom. She has the rights to it. There was a woman, the Ayla Gavra, it's the Ad Mil. So there was a woman who, when she brought into the marriage, she brought a nice woolen garment and biksuvasa, and she put it in the ksuva as tzom barzel, that he has to give her at the conclusion of the marriage, he has to give her the value of this woolen garment. Let's just say it was, let's say, $1,000. Shach, if he died, the guy died first, so she's supposed to get that $1,000 or the woolen garment, right? Whichever she wants, if we rule like Rabbi Yehuda. Shakua Yasme, but the orphans came ahead, his children, not her children necessarily. They might have been her children, but it doesn't matter. Upersua misna, and they put it over their father, the deceased, as like a burial shroud. Now, does she have the right? What's the deal here? Does she have the right to take that garment back? They kind of acquired it. So Amarava Kanyaya Mesana. The dead man acquired it. And now the children own it, meaning to say they could just give her the $1,000 and they get to keep the cloak. But didn't we just establish the laws like Rabbi Yehuda that she can get the asset back and they don't have the right to the asset? They have to just give her the money. So he says, yeah, even though Rabbi Yehuda says she has the right to the asset, Rabbi Yehuda himself would admit the mechusar guvaina. Rabbi Yehuda himself would admit that that's the case as long as the woman has not collected it from that which Rabbi Yehuda says that she gets the asset back. That's when she comes to collect the ksuba, she can collect the assets that she brought in. However, if the husband had actually collected it, then it belongs to him. But since this garment now is in the domain of the orphans, and so therefore, even though the woman has a loan on it, by them sanctifying it, so to speak, for the sanctity of the body, that has overridden the lien that the woman had on the property. So therefore, since she had not collected it yet, and since they used it in a way that sanctified it, that overrides her lien. Because Rava follows his logic. Rava says even though there's a lien on certain possessions, this lien can be overridden in certain areas. Hektish, if you consecrate something to the temple, you still owe the person the money, but let's say you consecrate, somebody has a lien on your house, and you give your lien to the temple, that you give your house to the temple, that the lien is overridden. Also, chametz becomes onerous, even though there's a lien on it. Vishichur, or if you free your slave, and the slave will go free, it overrides the lien, and the person has to collect it for himself or someone else. We did this Gemara recently. Where did we do this Gemara? We did it back on 46a. It appears 5 times in the Shas. Okay, we'll stop here, God willing. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to go back and answer any questions. Any questions?